Greetings and welcome to another live C# coding session. We are currently working on a Minecraft server launcher with a bunch of different features. And last time we started creating a server configuration dialog. Oh yes, he did. Sky is my great, awesome, long-time friend helping me out a bit, and I truly appreciate his assistance. So thank you very much, Sky. Um, anyway, we were creating a server configuration dialog, and at the moment it looks like this. But we should probably also do something about our server profile listing, how it looks, and maybe add in some buttons and stuff so we can actually add and edit these server profiles. So before we continue working on these actual server configuration dialog, I think I will pay a little more attention to the main window. We did throw in a couple of labels just to showcase some of the things that we would potentially need, as well as a picture box to show, say, the server icon. Now, one of the things about Minecraft servers is that you can actually customize what kind of icon it shows up in the client's multiplayer list. And the way to do that is by simply putting a specifically named PNG image into the server folder, and whenever a game client pings a server, the server will then transmit this particular PNG to the client, which then shows up in the multiplayer list. But one thing that we need to address in terms of building a server profile list, or rather there are a couple of things we need to address. One of them is how we should build up the display template, how we will do showing of these templates, and finally how we should address, say, adding in a new server, removing a server from the list if we don't want to run it anymore, and whatever else in terms of configuration buttons we need to interact with all the settings, as well as doing the start-stop stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that we need to dig into. Now, in terms of showing an actual server profile, we effectively have a lot of different ways that we can do this. One way would be to basically just set up a predetermined amount of slots, drop all the controls on there, and then simply manipulate the properties of those controls to show and hide profiles, put stuff in there like what's the custom name for this profile, the MOTD, and so on and so forth. Another way would be to, for example, build a user control that has everything in it, and then just drop a bunch of those on the form. And finally, we can make use of GDI Plus to effectively draw all the stuff on the form itself as if it was a bitmap canvas. So there are a bunch of different ways we can go about this. I think that we will grab the cheaty approach and simply just use GDI Plus for it, because it means that we don't have to create specific controls. It means we don't have to end up having 150 labels put on the form to support all of this stuff. We don't have to go through the tedious process of creating a user control for it. We can simply just draw the text and images on the form wherever we need them and in however many copies we need them. So some would consider this the complicated, difficult approach. Once you get the hang of it, it's actually not all that difficult. If you've ever at some point tried playing around with drawing stuff on a bitmap, it's pretty much identical to that, except that you need to set a style for the form in terms of how Windows should handle drawing the contents on the form. That is the only major difference between manually manipulating stuff on a bitmap and manipulating stuff on a form. Okay, so we know that we definitely need to add in some kind of server profile creation / editing dialog. So I think we will start by adding in a bunch of buttons to more easily give us that kind of control. Then we can create the profile editor and then go from there. So we know that we are definitely going to need a button so we can add a new server profile. So let's get that on there. For now, we'll just use these standard Windows controls. I do have a plan for a fully custom UI for the future, again using GDI+, but that's for a future episode. Let's put in button add and do a add caption. Prefixing with an ampersand will effectively turn the following letter into an Alt shortcut, so you can do Alt A to activate the add button, in case you didn't know. Okay, we probably also want an edit button, just for the sake of it, so let's put that in there. And a caption, whoops, edit. And we may also want to put a remove button in there. So let's put that, remove, and remove. And of course we want some start stop buttons. So let's put those in there. Start. And put that. And now I'm actually going to create a shortcut key conflict on purpose. Stop. There we go. In this setup, both the start and the stop button use the same shortcut key, Alt S. When such a conflict exists, what typically happens is that Windows will focus one of them, and then every time you use it, it will toggle the focus between them. But since we know for a fact that our construction of how it launches servers allows us to control these buttons on and off in terms of them being enabled or disabled, we can control which of these two buttons will be active, which means there will no longer be a shortcut key conflict because you cannot shortcut key access a disabled control. So this should definitely take care of that particular problem. All right. Let's see if we can center these a little more like this, for example. Yeah, we'll put them there. Alright, we also need to set up the click events for all of these, and I think my hard drive needs to start up again. There we go. So let's grab the events for them, like so. There we go. And as you can see, I've done some cleanup. We'll move these up here. Control events. There we go. And move these up here, like so. There we go. Okay, so actually, why don't we let's see. Nah, we'll leave them as is. Okay. So I mentioned that we wanted to do some direct on-form rendering, and that's definitely something that we are going to do. So to support that, we are going to change how rendering on the form happens. This is a graphical interface, so there is some amount of 2D rendering involved. And the way to tell Windows that we want to manipulate how stuff is rendered manually is to set the style for the form itself. This involves us having access to a bunch of different flags that each control individual parts of how the how styling of individual controls are handled. Now, the first one that we definitely need to enable is the all painting in Windows message paint. As it says here, if true, the control ignores the Windows message VM erase background to reduce flicker. This style should only be applied if control styles user paint bit is set true. The reason we need to enable this is so that we can fully control what's going on in terms of drawing stuff on the form. So we'll enable this. We also need to tell it to optimize double buffering. This effectively reduces any kind of blinking and flickering effect. So we'll add that. And we also want to force a redraw if the form is resized. That way we don't need to hook into the resize event and do the drawing manually. So might as well automate that part. And finally, we need to tell it that we are going to handle painting stuff on the form. And then tell it to enable all these flags. So we'll put them up here so they are more visible. That would be here. There we go. There we go. Alright. Now that we have set these flags, we also need some way to effectively capture the draw event. So what we're going to do is we are going to hook into the paint event, but we are actually going to rendering stuff on form. We are going to override the onPaint event handler. And the reason for doing this is so that we can allow Windows to do whatever it needs to do in terms of drawing stuff on the form, which based on Paint takes care of. Now, part of what we get through the Paint event arcs is a graphics object that is linked to the surface of the form. So if we go in here, we can see that it's sitting right here. This is identical to the graphics object that you can tie to a bitmap whenever you want to draw something on it. Except in this case it's bound to the surface of the form instead of a bitmap. After that it's pretty much exactly the same thing. So for now we'll leave it here, start it up just so you can see that everything is still running. There we go, everything's running. And the next bit we are going to do is we are going to paint a red square on the form starting at the upper left corner and have it try to utilize about a quarter of the form's size. First we need to know the width of the form. But since this is a Windows environment, the actual size of a window includes the borders as well as the title. We'll do W and the width property of the form. The border size is about 16 pixels. That's pretty much standard for the Windows environment. And the height minus the title and the bar is I think it's 38. So this should give us the actual inner width and inner height of the form. Then we can grab the graphics and do a fill rectangle. Grab one of the system brushes, use the red one, and do a rectangle starting at 0.0 width divided by 2 and height divided by 2. And this should now draw a red square on the form itself. There we go. And because we enabled the resize redraw property, we can do this and it will still fit the upper quarter of the form. So this is just to demonstrate how quickly and easily we can draw stuff on the form as if it was a bitmap. Now the reason these are showing up with the gray background is of course because these are standard controls and we haven't told them that we've changed how the surface of the form looks. I left them in there for now so we can use them as a reference point in terms of figuring out exactly what we need to draw here. Okay, so for now I will put this in a comment. There we go. And we will get back to this. We did add a couple of buttons here. One thing that we could do is, of course, still hook into the resize event so we can reposition these buttons whenever the form resizes. It's something that we can add later. For now, it's not vitally important. The important thing is that we need to build up some kind of setup where we can specify where the server is, how much memory to set aside, give it a custom name so we know which particular server each individual profile points to, in case the MOTD within the server properties file is identical across servers. Just some way of identifying it. So way back we actually did create a server profile config which at the moment pretty much only contains the path to where the server is, the name of the jar, and a memory setup, and that's it. Now these we should probably do something about now that we are adding in extra features. We also have a extra group within the config file that allows us to set a count in terms of how many profiles are stored within our configuration file. So we're going to have to do a little bit of uh, updating of our server profile config. We probably also want to move these into something different so we can pass these settings around. For one, we at some point need to pass this information to the server host class that handles the actual running of the server itself. So part of what we're going to do today is build up an extra dialog to handle this configuration for each individual profile. We're also going to migrate these settings into a separate setup. And for that, we're probably going to use another structure because it's the cheapest way of doing it. Okay, let's see about designing a profile dialog. So we are going to need another form. There we go. And this one will be the server profile config dialog. There we go. And we'll move it up to dialogs, like so. And then we can start messing about with this. Okay. We'll just do server profile as the title, have it center on screen. And then we need to change the form border style to fixed dialog. We don't need this dialog to be resizable, so there's no point in having it resizable. We don't want to be able to maximize it. We don't want to be able to minimize it. There we go. Okay, so what do we need to do on this particular form? We need to be able to specify a name for the server or a title. So let's drop in a label quick. We'll do server name. We need to add in a text box so the user can actually put some text in there. There we go. We also need to specify where this particular server instance is. So let's do server path. And this one we will leave a little bigger. And then we need a browse button so we can make use of a browse dialog, for example. Nah, actually we'll do hang on, I'll wait with this for a minute. Server path, and then we'll add in this, because then we can do the open in one go. Server jar, and a text box for that. We could just do a label for this, but we'll just use a text box and set it to read only. The same for the path. And now we'll add the button. There we go. And we'll call this select. And select. There we go. And we also need to be able to specify how much memory should be set aside, or the maximum. So let's get that in there. Memory. And for that we will use a numeric up down. because it's just so much easier. And we probably need to remember to rename these. This would be the server name, and this would be the server path. This would then be the server jar. There we go. And this would then be the memory. Nice. Finally, we need a accept and cancel button, so we'll add those two. Accept, and we'll put the cancel button in here too. And here we go. Cancel, and we'll do like this. Okay. I don't want to handle figuring out whether a user hits enter or not, so I'm just going to make use of the built-in accept and cancel button references. So for the accept button, we'll of course use the accept button, and the same for the cancel. There we go. Now we don't have to handle those. Okay. Then we'll see about cleaning this up a bit. Before I do that, I will quickly reference the server config dialog. We changed the color scheme of this, so I'm thinking we will do about the same thing for this one. So let's start by quickly setting the back color and go on this one. These, of course, are now completely unreadable, so we will change those to this one, and then we will change these to be fixed single and do the back color as this one and the fore color as complete white. There we go. And we'll do the same for this one. And the fore color, whoops, right there. And we of course also need to configure all this, but we should get these set up a little more convenient. So we'll see, move this down a little bit, like so, and then group these two together. Like so. And put this up here. And then just for alignment purposes, we'll put this at 145. So we'll align this and then modify the height so we can put it here. Nice. There we go. Okay. Then we will add in the cancel and accept buttons here and resize the form. There. That looks a little better. Okay. All right. So we still need to be able to change the contents in here. So for now, we will just do some typical property exchange stuff, and then later on, when we have the actual structure to handle the profile, we'll go back and modify that. Yes, that might be a little bit repeating the same steps over and over, but it's the reason I do it this way is to show you how the thought process and incremental development of stuff can go in and simplify things that were more complicated to do before. So it's just part of the process. We'll do the cleanup here. There we go. Grab this, stuff it down here, and this would be the form stuff, form events. There we go. For this, we will also hook the shown event, so we can properly update the dialog at the right time. So that takes care of that. And then we need to add some custom properties to this. Now, what do we need? We need to know the name of the server, we need to know the path, the jar, and the memory size. So we'll set those up as properties that we can set before showing the dialog and retrieve after it closes. So we will need a string that determines the server name. We will need a string that determines the server path. We will need a string for the server jar. And we will need an integer for the memory. Oops, set. And we'll start by setting that to 256 default. There we go. Okay. We now have the option to both set and fetch these properties. We also need to add in the event for the select button. And we should probably also think about the accept and cancel. Cancel in and of itself we don't really need to handle in any way. Windows does that for us. But we do need to handle the accept button. So we'll grab the event for select so we can make it work. And we'll grab the event for the accept button. There we go. Grab these, move them up here in control events, like so. And then we might as well do the select button right away. There are two ways we can approach this. One way would be to go into the dialogues toolbox and drop an open file dialog on the form itself and then reference it from there. However, we strictly speaking don't need to do this because we can still instantiate this particular dialog wherever we need it. So just to save on the clutter, I prefer doing it this way. It's fairly simple. Open file dialog, name it dialog equals new. There we go. And then we can set some properties for it. We know that we need to filter for jars, so we will Minecraft server jar, not har jar, there we go, which is of course a jar. The way the filter works is that it's always a dual setup. The first part will be the text that's shown as the filter option, and the second part will be whatever file filtering patterns you need to set, and these of course support wildcards. If you need to add multiple different filters, you simply add another pipe and then whatever, and then another filter. Fairly straightforward. Since we don't need this, we'll get rid of it. We would like to check that the path specified really does exist, and that way the dialog does it for us. We also want it to ensure that the file selected actually exists. That way we don't have to necessarily check it here. And that should pretty much be it. we can set the title. Um, Title. Select the Minecraft server jar you would like to use. Now, this will effectively change the actual title bar of the dialog to show this specific text. Whether you want to use it or not, up to you. Otherwise, it will just use the default text for an open file dialog. Okay, next up, we will have the dialog show. And we kind of want to make sure that the dialog is actually completed. So we will make it modal by specifying this form as the owner. That effectively blocks access to the form itself until the dialog has closed. If a dialog is cancelled, it will always return a dialog result of cancel for any of the open file dialog, save file dialog, and folder browser dialogs. If the positive button is clicked, it will always default to return OK. So we'll use this to check that we actually did get something here. Okay. If this is the case, then we know that we are getting a path and a file name that actually do exist, and we'll get those from here. Let's do file path name dialog dot file name. There we go. We kind of need to split these into two because we need the path by itself. We also need the jar by itself, so we can more easily access whatever else we need to access within the server folder itself. So since we know for a fact that this will be a fully qualified path and file name, the quick and dirty way of splitting these is to simply just look for the last occurrence of a backslash and effectively split the file name into there. One part will be the path and the other part will be the file name itself. One thing to keep in mind here is that we do not want to update the properties just yet. The reason for that is we need the acceptance of the user before we actually update them. So instead, we are simply just going to throw them into the text boxes that we have. So for the server path, we will set the property as file path name.substring, starting at the beginning and ending at the last index of a backslash. Now, we would like to include the trailing backslash, so we need to specify +1 because any kind of position searching within a string is 0 based and an actual length is 1 based. So offset by 1, there we go. And then we also need to add the jar in, so that's effectively the remaining part of it, which of course would be the last index of the backslash, and we need to move past it because we want to start at the first character of the actual file name. And we'll grab this, grab the length of the file path name and subtract the position that we found from it. And there we have it. Now these two lines of codes now split the path and the file name into two separate entities, and that's pretty much job done. Finally, we need to dispose of the dialog itself because we don't need it anymore. Alright. In terms of these, the server path and the server jar, we need to change to read only. We don't want the user to be able to type in these. So we'll set those. There we go. We also need to specify the minimum and maximum amount of memory. So we'll set those right away. Minimum 256. I believe the minimum memory assignment on Java 8 is 256. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And the maximum is about 8 gigabytes of memory, which would come to 8 times 1024 is 8192. And yes, I do know these by heart. Okay, we've set some defaults there, and that should take care of this. This dialog should now be able to present us with this nice setup. We have a working select button. We've got the memory assignment. The last thing we need to do is to modify the accept button to actually migrate whatever was entered in here into the properties so we can retrieve them on the main form. So let's have a look at that. Now, we kind of want to put in some conditions that will have to be met for the accept button to actually trigger. See, if we say, for example, forget to specify a server name, it would be nice to be able to tell the user, you derped up, you have to specify a name. The same if you forget to select a server jar, if you've simply just pop the new dialog, click accept with all of the entries empty, we kind of need to provide some kind of feedback. So let's check if we actually got some viable data. Alright, so if, and I'll split this a little bit so we can better see what's going on. If the server name has a length greater than 0 and the server path has a length that's greater than 0 and the server jar has a length that's greater than 0, then we know that we can trust all of this to be correctly configured, at least to some extent. So we'll accept this. Now, if one of these conditions fail, then we'll go through them and figure out exactly which one failed. By doing that, we can then pop a specific error message to the user to tell the user, this is what you forgot to do. Always try to help the user, but don't assume in your messages that the user is a complete idiot, because that's just not a good thing to do. Nobody likes to be, how should I put this, painted as a complete idiot, so be careful how you choose to word things. Okay, so here, if this one has a length of 0, then no name was specified. So we will kindly inform the user that he or she needs to specify a server name. We'll do that with the standard message box because it's nice and easy. There we go. So, you have not provided a name for this server profile. Please specify a name and try again. Fairly straightforward. Simple matter of fact information. No server name specified. And then we'll put an OK button in there. And we'll use a exclamation point for the dialog itself. And just to help the user along so he or she doesn't have to move the mouse too um, 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 well, that kind of depends on where I'm from. Do you mean where I was born or where I currently live? Um, I was born in the northern part of Zealand, and I currently live on Lolland, which is one of the two big islands just south of Zealand. And yes, the island is actually called Lolland. And a lot of foreigners get a huge laugh out of this. There we go. Okay, we want to help the user along. The way to do that is by forcing the focus on the server name text box. And the easy way of doing that is simply invoking the focus method. There we go. Um, Now what happens here is it pops the dialog, and then as soon as the user clicks the OK button, it forces the focus on the server name box so the user can start typing in a name right away. That way the user doesn't have to grab his mouse, move it up to the text box, click, and then be able to type. When designing a good UI, these are the small details that you need to keep in mind when doing it. Mostly because this is all the detailing that makes a huge difference in how your target users experience the usage of your UI. I consider it of vital importance. Other developers couldn't care less. And that's why you sometimes run into an application that you feel is somewhat clunky. These tiny things make a huge difference in how the user experiences your application. So help the user along, definitely. Okay, we have a second condition that might end up not being met since we're using a open file dialog for it. And we've set these two text boxes to read only. We can somewhat safely assume that if there's something in there, the select button was used. But if they are empty, then, well, you kind of need to throw that at the user as well. So if the path has a length of 0, or the jar has a length of 0, then we'll pop a similar message. And get rid of that. You have not selected a Minecraft server jar. Please select the Minecraft server jar you would like to use for this server profile. Boom. There we go. No server jar selected. There we go. Okay, so where do we focus stuff now? Well, we know that these two text boxes are both read-only, so there's little point in focusing on those. So instead, we will simply just focus on the select button. That will give it that slight blue tint. Depending on which version of Windows, it may look a little bit different, but at least it's focused. So, same as before, except in this case it's a button. It has a focus method, and by focusing the button right after throwing the error message, The user can hit the spacebar to activate the button, or of course use the mouse to click on it. Alright, now this is the victory condition. So here we actually need to start grabbing whatever's in the form and stuffing the data into our properties. So we will do that. For the server name property, we'll grab the contents of server name and trim whatever spaces might be there. The path and jar, pretty much the same thing. Server jar, trim, and we also need to set the memory. So value. Now, if we take a look at this, we can see that a numeric up-down actually is a decimal. It's not an int. So we need to cast this for it to convert properly. So we'll cast it to an int, which is basically a numeric conversion. And that's it. And the final thing we need to do, and here's the really cool part, whenever you assign a form a dialog response that is different from cancel, that automatically triggers the closing of the form, which means we don't have to specifically keep in mind to close the form afterwards. We simply just assign the dialog response that we want, and then we can forget about the rest of it. So we'll set dialog result to OK, just to keep it on par with how other dialogs handle this stuff. There we go. Finally, set the dialog result to OK, which forces the form closed automatically. There we go. Nice. So, what do we have? We can put in a server name. We can select a server jar somewhere. We can set the memory size. We can hit the accept button. We just for the sake of argument could put in the cancel button. We'll do that. Stuff it up here. And again, this time we will just assign the cancel to it. Actually, I need to correct myself. It's whenever you assign some result or some value to dialog result, that triggers the form close. Whether it's already the same value or not doesn't matter. It's the instant you assign a value to it that it triggers the form close. The other way of closing a form is to simply just call the close method. That's it. I know that these are strictly speaking not required. We can access all the properties and methods of the form itself without referencing this. This is something I do because of personal preference, because this then reminds me by having it prefixed with the word this, it reminds me that this is part of the actual form itself. So it is just a personal reminder. You don't have to specify this at all. When working with huge complicated projects, sometimes it's a really good idea to put in comments for yourselves that explains what this particular part of the code does or what it depends on. Sometimes you may want to put in some kind of reference information so you know where this belongs to. This for me does that job. Okay, so let's see, what else do we need to do? we need to actually update the form contents with whatever might have been assigned to the custom properties, and we will do that in the shown event. The reason we do it in the shown event is because the load event triggers before we are able to change the properties of it. So doing it at the instant where the form is being shown is the perfect place to do it. So we'll assign those from the properties. There we go. Server path, like so. The server jar, like so. And finally, the numeric up down needs the memory set. Now, one interesting thing is that when assigning an integer value to any of the floating point variable types like float, decimal, whenever you grab a integer value and try to assign it to a floating point variable, you can easily do that. However, if you have a floating point variable with some kind of decimals attached to it, you may need to do some rounding when you need it converted into an actual integer value. So that's why this works without having to cast it into a decimal. We could do that, but as you will see, it will fade it away. And if we take a look at it, it says unnecessary cast. There we go. All right, cool. Put in a quick comment here. Populate the form with the custom property data. There we go. Okay. We now have a pretty neat little dialog that we can use to both create and edit server profiles. So let's get rid of all this junk. We don't need it. There we go. All right. We'll close this down and then see if we can put it to use. All right. So let's grab the add button. Just like we did in the select button on the dialog itself, we pretty much need to do about the same thing here. So let's grab the server profile config dialog, name it dialog, instantiate a copy of it. There we go. Since this is a brand new one, we could potentially set all these to default nothing. We know for a fact that the dialog pre-initializes these as empty and pre-initializes the memory size to 256 megabytes. So since this is an add dialog and we are instantiating a new object based on it, we really don't need to clear these. So the only thing that we really need to do is to just check the result of it, and if it is okay right there, then we need to grab the contents of it and of course dispose of it. Yeah, display rectangle, absolutely. Let's grab the dispose method instead. There we go. And this is where we will create and store the server profile. So just for the sake of argument, we'll do equals dialog.server name. We'll do server path. Yeah, this one. We'll do the server jar, which of course is right there, and we also need memory size, which would be this one. There we go. then save this. Now here we could actually run into a tiny problem. Um, if, for example, we start creating a new server profile and let's say we give it exactly the same name as a different server profile that we already have, we could potentially have a naming conflict here. Whether that is actually relevant or not is effectively up to us to decide. Since we are going to make use of effectively separate profile entities, it doesn't really matter whether we run into a naming conflict or not, because we'll simply reference these by indexes. So there's effectively no need to have unique names. That will be completely up to whoever's using this program. So it's just something to keep in mind. All right, let's see if this actually works. And it pops the dialog. Nice. And hitting escape closes it. Since we at the moment don't really have any kind of response on the main dialog, we'll just throw a message box here containing the server name, the path, and the jar, just for the sake of it. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce your name, Kohatel. That's actually a very good question. Let me throw another one back at you. Not to be rude or anything, but consider this. Windows Presentation Foundation is in essence merging what equals WinForms with some kind of creative graphical based presentation tool. Whether you want to use WinForms or not, at the end of the day, whenever you build something in Windows Presentation Foundation, you are adding what equates to the presentation application from the Office package on top of WinForms. So at the core of it, WinForms is still in use, however differently referenced. When comparing the memory spendage and such, the footprints of two applications, one written in WinForms and one written in WPF, I'm pretty sure that the overall resource spendage is greater on the Windows Presentation Foundation built application. There are definitely reasons to use WinForms, especially when it has to do with running low footprint applications and high performance applications. Windows Presentation Foundation simply cannot keep up. So, which would you prefer? And posing that question, of course, depends on the actual implementation requirements. For some things, it will definitely be faster and easier to do things in WPF because it does a lot of work for you. But at the end of the day, for the given task at hand or the given project at hand, it kind of depends on what kind of performance you need and what kind of resulting output you need, and effectively also, I guess, to some extent, the skill level and laziness of the development team. I'm not trying to offend anyone by saying this, but to some extent it comes down to how much work do you want to put into finishing off this project um, based on the requirements. Thank you very much for the follow, Mikkel. Personally, I prefer having full control over what's going on. I generally dislike having to depend too much on other libraries, and doing some of the things that I sometimes do in applications is, let's put it simply, a hassle doing it in Windows Presentation Foundation. So my personal preference is, yeah, I'll put a little extra work into it, doing things in WinForms over Windows Presentation Foundation any day. Yes, it absolutely is. Um, like I said, whenever you venture into some kind of development project, you should try, and this is my personal opinion, please feel free to disagree. This definitely is my personal opinion. Whenever you start venturing into some development project, you should probably consider what the end result should be, how much memory you will allow your project to spend, as well as how fast you need your pro product to be. So it's a matter of choosing the environment um, over what kind of end result you have to accomplish. Um, yes, and that is exactly showing you in a live example the major difference between using WinForms and Windows Presentation Foundation. And yes, it does use a different rendering engine. However, a good portion of the rendering engine is still based on GDI Plus, which WinForms definitely makes available to you. So there are benefits of using one platform over another. It definitely always depends on the actual project itself. Um, so choose your platform wisely. Don't just assume don't just assume that this particular platform will always be suitable for every kind of development, because there are certain things that a different platform might be more suitable to accomplish. And developing your own skills across multiple different platforms will only benefit you in the long run. Personally, I have a list of over 100 different programming languages that I have been through over the years. Being capable of jumping between them is definitely also a huge benefit to your portfolio. So I would definitely recommend not sticking with one specific chosen platform throughout your development career. Um, Yes, I am Rook. You're absolutely right, and that's pretty much the point I was trying to make with it. Anyways, I'm not saying that one or the other is the only true way to go about business. This is basically boils down to the 30 or 40 or 50-year long religious war between developers. What platform is the best? What programming language is the best? The way I see it, none of them are. Um, and that usually spawns some kind of what the well, none of them are in quotation marks best for everything. One may be better to solve one particular task where another might be better at solving another particular task. So um, it's always better if you are capable of um, choosing whichever platform would be better suited to solve this particular project or this particular task, and then go from there. That would be one of the major reasons that when, for example, you look at, say, some random game in your Steam library, if you look into the folder that contains the game itself, you will see a bunch of DLL files. Um, oh yes, absolutely. Um, all of those DLL files may be developed in different languages depending on what kind of performance is needed. If you look at something like OpenGL and DirectX, the core of those two graphics libraries is most likely written in C++, if not C directly. But we can easily implement those as part of our C# .NET execution, and then simply include those DLL files along with the executable for our product. So use whichever platform is better suited for solving this particular task. Don't lock yourself on one specific platform in terms of development because it will hurt you in the long run. It is way better if you as a developer are flexible enough within your choice of platforms um, because that effectively makes you a more valued developer. So keep that in mind. Um, okay, so we were here, yes. I was going to do a test run on the um, um, add server profile dialog. That's what I was trying to say. Okay, so let's see what happens if we click accept on an empty dialog. You have not provided a name for this server profile. Okay, some random name. You have not selected a Minecraft server jar. Okay, let's go and see if we can select one of those. And luck would have it, we have one right here. So let's grab that. And boom. There we go. You are so very welcome, Kohitel. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Okay, so uh, the server profile creation seems to be working. Just for the sake of trial, we'll grab a copy of this down to the edit button, and then we'll just, for testing purposes, hard code some information in here, like for example, set the server name to yay, this works like this, and we will set the memory to let's say 4 gigs, and then we'll pop the dialog. These two are more or less identical. The only difference is that before showing the dialog we put something into the properties. You can do these tricks with properties back and forth between any kind of form within a project. This is a pretty neat way of exchanging information between forms. And yes, a regular form you can also have shown modal. Fair enough. All right, edit. Yay, this works. And it also set the memory. Since we haven't specified a path and a jar, it'll let us know. Um, this is just for demonstration purposes to show you that our dialog actually does what it's supposed to. Thank you very much for the follow, Kohatel. All right, we have these, but at the moment we don't exactly have any kind of means to store them. So how are we going to go about this? Well, um, we know that we kind of want to be able to save this information. We also want to be able to load it between sessions of this application running. Uh, Initially, we used the server profile config class to handle that, um, but we kind of need to be able to store these in individual profiles. So for the sake of making things easier for us in the future, I think that we will go ahead and create ourselves a new, well, strictly speaking, this doesn't need to be a class. We'll convert those. It's just quicker doing it this way. We'll do server profile, get rid of some of this junk we probably don't need, get rid of that, and then do a public struct instead. Structures are very neat features. Um, these have been around for God knows how many years, at least 30. And they are basically a way to construct a custom collection of data. In some languages, these are called types. In some languages, they are called structs, and in some languages, they are actually called records. So it kind of depends on which specific language, but most languages support this kind of custom data collection setups. Now, one question that probably will show up is, why don't I just implement a class for this? Well, the quick and dirty answer is the overall memory footprint of a struct is way smaller than the overall memory footprint of a class, because any class that you implement will inherit from a bunch of parent structures and objects, and um, get things like handling methods and God knows what else. We'll do a quick private class bleh here, and we'll just do a constructor bleh, put nothing in there. This is pretty much an empty class, and we could just put some properties in here. But just to show you, if we do bleh, new bleh, then this by default has these four methods. Now, equals and toString effectively stem from the core data type called object. Every class and most structs also inherit from object, which is the topmost container declaration. These two they stem from, the type also stems from object, but this one is a little bit different. This actually allows you to, at least to some extent, serialize stuff, but overall you have a bunch of methods in there that you may not have on a struct. We have a player profile here. Here you get the same four methods. However, these are not as fully implemented as they are when declaring a class. The get hash code for a struct is generally only a quarter the size of that of a class in terms of how much memory it spends. These are, of course, the four properties of the player profile. Some would prefer using classes. Personally, I prefer using structs whenever possible, simply because they are smaller memory-wise. So the more memory you spend, the more sluggish your application will also become, because you have to handle greater amounts of memory. Just have 8 to 16 bytes additional. Yes. Yes, exactly. Um, anyway, server profile. We know that we need a string to hold the name. So we'll put name in there. We also need the path and the jar, as well as the memory size. There we go. And as Kohatel suggested, there are certain sizes for certain things, and these particular sizes also deal with the actual size of a boolean. Depending on whether you're running 32-bit or 64-bit, the Boolean memory spendage may be as little as 1 byte and as much as 16 bytes just to hold a true-false flag. So use those with consideration as well. If you end up having huge structures that have a lot of booleans in them, consider using a byte instead, because a byte is per definition only 1 byte big. So that will always be cheaper to do. The downside is that you need to type convert, so you can properly handle a true-false setup, unless you specifically build your comparison checks to check for a byte value being 0 indicating false or being greater than 0 indicating true. It's something to consider if memory spendage is a huge problem. Anyway, enough about that. We'll need to be able to assign all this stuff right away. Jar and memory size. There we go. Name trim. The reason I'm putting trim in here is we know that we need these without spaces. We have no idea whether we at some point might end up in a situation where this particular structure is created from some other source. So we'll just do the cleanup stuff right away. This one equals the path and the jar. Do the jar as well. I don't doubt that it can be that big on Windows Presentation Foundation. However, I have never seen it go above 32 bytes of memory spendage on a 64-bit compilation in WinForms. And I know that if you build a console application or a say a Windows service or a dynamic link library, that is also the maximum that a Boolean field will ever take up, 32 bytes. Sorry, 32 bits, which is 4 bytes. Memory size, grab this one. Memory size, there we go. All right. Ah, nice, we don't need this. Get rid of that. Let's see, did we actually put some documentation in here? Yeah, a little bit. We'll do that. Contains the base information for a Minecraft server profile. Sweet. All right. Now that we have an actual struct to do this, we can probably go up here and do a quick modification to this one. Wouldn't it be nice if we also had a property that utilizes this new struct? So we could simply pass that instead. So what if we add that public um, huh, um, don't you mean bits? We needed the server profile here. Now, since we don't have that at the moment, we'll import the namespace. There we go. And see if we can suggested name server profile. Yeah, I guess we'll use that. We'll just call it profile. There we go. Do a git and a set, and we'll do a new empty one. And default it to 256. There we go. Okay. So, now that we have this, it might be beneficial for us to get rid of the old ones so we can more quickly pass these profiles around. We are going to need to pass these particular profiles around between the dialog, each individual server host instance, and so on and so forth. So we will get rid of these and just keep the profile. And then, of course, we need to change these. So change this to profile name. Right. We shall do profile equals new server profile, and it needs the name of it first. So we'll grab that, move it down here. There we go. Then it needs the path. And the jar. And finally the memory size. And we still need to cast that. Put it there. And that sets the profile for the response. And then we need to update the shown event. Here we should be able to use this one. Whoops. And this one. And this one. And this one, like so. Due to its protection level. Right. There we go. Nice. So, what kind of changes did we get? Well, we can now do server profile equals dialog.profile, and then we can grab it from there. Now, this will speed up the process or make it easier for us, less typing and so on and so forth, because we could potentially just assign this back to say a collection or a list or even an array, and thereby pass along all this data with a lot less typing involved. Of course, at some point we need to access these specific um, properties as we need them. But now that we actually have the server profile itself, we may want to put that up for an update somewhere. You see, get rid of this. There we go. Before we had to get rid of some of this stuff here. Whenever we need to configure a new server instance, server host instance, previously we specified the path and the jar, as well as the amount of memory to set aside by means of the configure server method. Now that we have a structure that contains all of this stuff, we could very easily add in an overload for this that accepts the server profile structure instead of these individual arguments. So just to make it easier, because then we can simply specify the index of a list that contains the profile and pass that on to the server host stuff. This is something that we will get back to. For the moment, we kind of need to get the other one, the other important part of this updated, which is the server profile config class. Now, this makes use of a standard ini file, and at the moment it has 3 fixed properties, thereby only supporting one server profile. So this is definitely something that we need to change. Now, since we kind of want this to be able to handle the loading and saving for us, I actually can't remember if we did a save. Yes, we did. To do, maybe add in and check whether something has changed. If changes exist, then do the save, otherwise skip. Yeah. Good note to self. Definitely something that we will look at implementing here. So, God, this is messy. It does the job. All right. The file I/O stuff, which at the moment just interfaces to the ini file, blah 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 blah. All this stuff well, let's get rid of most of it actually. Yeah, that one needs to be moved, so let's do that. This just ensures that we actually do get an integer value out of a string. Nothing too complex. Converts the passed string into an int value. Returns an int value based on a string, or 0 if unable to convert. There we go. Alright, so when we constructed this, we put in a separate group in the ini file that contains a profile count. We also kind of hard-coded the first profile to just contain the path, the memory, the jar, and the memory set aside for it, and that was pretty much it. So these two we definitely need to update, but we also need to be able to add a profile to this, remove a profile, change the contents of it, and so on and so forth. And we may also want to be able to do some searching in it. Strictly speaking, it's not needed because down the line we will eventually do a full scrollable list of all the server profiles in here, so searching them specifically may not be all that needed. In any case, some of this stuff we kind of need to out the door. Boom. All gone. And this stuff up here we will, for the moment, simply just put in comments, because by doing that we remind ourselves of some of the formatting of it. Alright. We do have a save in here. It initializes the path and attempts to load it if it exists. Mikkel asks what my opinion on progressive web apps or the web in general is. Honestly, I don't like the direction that web design is taking at the moment. What they consider beautiful websites is full of very noisy graphics, making it harder for us to interpret the contents of the page. And honestly, that's something that I focus on a lot, because tons of animations tend to make it too noisy for me to be able to focus on one specific thing, because my eye keeps rolling back to whatever that animation might be. Whatever web trends are currently up, well, follow whatever you feel is the right way, and go with that, just like we have done for the past 30 years. There is no right or wrong way to do web, as long as you accomplish the task. Whatever the contents of this site is, as long as it's usable and the UI and whatever media stuff might be there doesn't get in the way of the user actually using it, then mission accomplished. However it looks, if you have a great artistic department that wants to put a lot of media stuff in there, let them do it. If it fits the overall theme. Personally, I don't particularly like super heavy pages. I'm no great fan of jQuery and jQuery so-called powered pages, because when I load a page, I expect to be able to start looking at the content while the page is still loading. Most of these jQuery powered pages have a ton of stuff they load in the background while you're sitting there looking at a loading icon. We have enough of that in the gaming industry. Why does that need to translate onto a web page? Secondly, why am I forced to download 50 megabytes of content just to get, I don't know, the opening hours of a shop? It's kind of pointless. The web, in my opinion, needs to be efficient. It needs to stop moving in the bloat direction it's moving in at the moment, because it puts overly much strain on the web servers and web server clusters to actually be able to deliver the data. The positive side, of course, is that it pushes the connection vendors to build bigger connections for us, which of course is nice. But the one spot where I feel that we need the high bandwidth capacity is for media streaming, not to download a web page that takes up 1.5 gigabytes to download, which takes half an hour. So I don't like the directions that the web overall is going in. Um, I'm having a hard time deciding how I want to put up my pages now that I'm rebuilding them from scratch. But I'm definitely not going to follow the mainstream web trends, that's for sure. It's simply too noisy, too many different colors. It looks like some of them looks like um, I don't know, some LSD trip from the 60s. Some of them look like they've been halfway scanned in from a newspaper from the 1980s, mixed up with some kind of future, I don't know, techno trance color setup. In my opinion, no, no thanks. But like I said, whatever accomplishes the task and go with it. There's no right way or wrong way. The only place where they actually teach, in quotation marks, the right way and the wrong way is during some of these educational um, web design educations. That's pretty much the only place where they put this stuff up, and most of what's being taught there is again based on partly personal preference and partly what the graphical trends are at the moment, which stems from things like company marketing campaigns and such. SPA being. Ah, yes. Yeah, well, again, it's a matter of how much, I guess, junk is running on it. Um, Text input could lag because of some kind of animation running. If you investigate your task manager while running such pages, you will most likely see that one of the instances of your browser is eating up a lot of CPU time. The reason for that is because it's running some kind of media application, or B, because it's running some kind of bloaty script doing whatever it does. Um, my personal opinion is that you should always try to keep animations to a bare minimum. If you need some kind of media presentation, go with WebGL and do a proper OpenGL implementation using some of those available components. Unity has a very nice one. Um, on the other hand, if you are going to show some kind of video, throw in a media player, but do not, please, 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 I beg of you, do not set it to automatically start playing when the page is loaded. It is one of the most annoying new trends that started to show up on the web. Personally, I heavily dislike being blown away by my speakers because some video starts autoplaying at volume 600%. Um, I went on the page to get some kind of information. I didn't go on the page to have some video start blowing my eardrums and demanding attention and not be able to get rid of the video. If I want to watch a video on a web page, I will go look it up in the appropriate place and start it up myself. Um, so, and I know it's modern trends and all that. Yeah, it's not for me. Definitely not my. Um, well, there's a perfect example. Um, when they originally designed the graphical internet, um, all of the current stuff that we see on web pages today was definitely not in their mind at all. Over the past decade, browsers have been through a major, and I really mean major, transformation. Most of the most commonly used browsers today offer some kind of hardware acceleration, meaning they make use of your graphics card to calculate what's being shown on screen, possibly also to render the actual surface. Um, and the main reason that this hardware acceleration is now an integral part of the browsers is because things like advertisement companies and media companies in general think that the web was designed for a media presentation. And in my opinion, having worked with web for 25, 30 years myself, um, no, I'm sorry, but the graphical web was definitely not designed for media presentation like this. If you truly and seriously have a huge need for um, actual media presentation, um, my opinion is build a freaking client for it and let users get that client instead. Don't abuse the web like this. It's bloaty, it's heavy on CPU, it's heavy on memory usage. I mean, I start up Chrome and poof, 1 GB of memory gone. And for what? Showing a web page? Seriously? This HTML page is maybe, let's say, 80 kilobytes. Why does it take up 1 GB of memory and 6, 7 instances of the same application running just to show this 80 kilobytes of HTML code on a flat surface? It's insane, and it's only going to get worse. So be prepared. It's definitely not in my book, a good direction that the graphical web is moving towards at the moment. The more we rely on such media presentation capabilities of the browsers, the more we end up exposing our websites and our browsers to malicious code. The bigger the programs are, the bigger the chances of some kind of oversight or mistake or something forgotten, and poof, you have a hole that you can stuff some kind of malware into. And we all know where that leads. Having said that, I am a, how should I put this, KISS kind of guy. Keep it stupid simple. Um, if you are doing a server launcher like this, then you should try to build it to be capable of that. You should not try to build it to be capable of doing a Twitch stream of the server instance running. That makes little sense. Um, so, but again, it's all up to what the individual project is. Just make sure that whatever code you build, try your best to create as small as possible code, and code that takes the least amount of memory possible. If you do that, then your stuff is less likely to become laggy, and more likely to be something that users end up taking for granted. Um, when people start taking your product for granted, then you have achieved the ultimate goal as a developer. You have created something that they end up depending on and taking for granted, which just goes to show how well you have done in implementing your code and implementing your features. Well, the internet is the web, the internet. People often forget that the internet in and of itself is a gigantic network, which means any kind of service is potentially available on this global network across the entire planet. The web is just a part of it, which today, of course, is the graphical media web that it's becoming. And yes, I think it's too slow. That's why I often try to build my stuff more along the old static HTML pages. However, um, we as developers, and I mean everyone in channel at the moment and every other developer out there, we have the power to do something about the slow internet, the slow web pages, the laggy stuff. If we hone our skills towards being better at what we do, writing more efficient code, relying less on 250 different libraries that come from 250 different vendors, and instead implement the code ourselves. Um, Exchange information about how to write efficient code, how to reduce the memory footprint of stuff, then we can do our bit to at least try to get the web to become a little more efficient than it is at the moment. Right now, the advertisement companies and the media companies are the ones that are dominating the web. Miscellaneous different kinds of artists out there have a huge say in what looks good and what doesn't look good, and what should be on a web page today. If you go look up current web trends, you'll see a lot of weird things out there. Some of them are definitely interesting for this particular purpose, but most of the web trends that are put on top 10 or top 20 lists today, they are websites for, say, photo artists or museums or stuff like that. And for the general purpose website, most of the media stuff there is absolutely useless. I mean, we do have some pretty neat features available to us, like slide in, slide out, side panels, fading drop-down menus, and so on and so forth. And yeah, it might look cool as you're playing about with it, but at the end of the day, whoever comes to your page with a specific goal in mind. And in my opinion, you as a developer, and that of course also includes myself, you have the responsibility towards the user to grant that user the quickest possible way to any specific goal within the site itself. Back in the day, we used to employ a strict rule of no more than 3 clicks to goal. Which effectively said that once the user arrives on your web page, he must be able to achieve his intended goal within 3 clicks from the front page. Now, if it's a huge article site, that particular rule is way more difficult to achieve. However, if you grab a quick example, put up a search box with a search button, then the first click would be focusing on the search box. The second click would be clicking on the search button, and if you build your search option or your search engine on your site efficient enough, then the third click would be the article that person is looking for. That's the three click to goal rule, and it is actually achievable even on huge article sites if you do it right. That's all a matter of how good and how efficient your code is that runs on the back end of your website. The rest of it, some of it, most of it is actually just pure eye candy. Most eye candy gets in the way of achieving the particular intended goal. It may look nice, but if I have to waste 20 minutes trying to find an article on a site somewhere, or say the opening hours of a shop, then that site, in my opinion, fails utterly to achieve the goal that must be there, because human behavior is, I have a goal, I need to achieve this goal, I don't care about the rest. I mean, how many times have you actually sat there and looked at, say, the design of YouTube? How many times have you sat there and actually looked at the design of Twitch, for that matter? Some of it may look nice, but how efficient is it at granting the user the goal that they intend to achieve? It's something that I think we as developers should definitely think about, and maybe try to see if we can push all of the so-called designers out there to try and remember. It may look nice and grand, but if this particular video is blowing my eardrums, 9 out of 10 times I'm banning that site, which means they lost a potential customer or a potential user because of that annoyance. I'm one of those people using AdBlock because I am sick to death of looking at adverts. Whenever a site pops up a message, we can see you're using AdBlock, blah blah blah, please turn it off because blah blah blah. If they are consequently blocking all of their content until I either completely disable AdBlock, close the browser, start it up again, and then try to access the site, or they just block it for the heck of it, even with the site whitelisted, then that site goes into my banned bin. I'm not particularly interested in being completely overrun by 50 different adverts down a page where I'm looking for 2 bits of information. If it's a site that kindly asks, we need this to survive, and those ads seem to be way less intrusive and there are not that many of them on the page, then I may go up and whitelist it just to be sure that they get their part. But I also know from the web business that 9 out of 10 websites, they literally get peanuts out of showing all these ads today. So how much is it worth? It might be more beneficial to either offer up a paid subscription or throw a donation box on there. You would most likely earn more money that way than through the ads, simply because all of the web ad agencies out there, they rule that market, and there is no way that you're ever going to get any kind of decent money out of it. It's simply not possible because they are making the money, not you. And it doesn't matter how many ads you are hosting for them. At the end of the day, you need to do something like, I don't know, 250,000 shows of a particular ad before you actually earn $1. So ads are a pestilence that we need to get rid of. Yes, you're absolutely right. But I think before we do that, I kind of need a nature break. So we'll take a couple of minutes break, get something to drink, nature calls done, and all that stuff, and then we will be back.